Welcome back. Thank you if you're watching. If you don't, well then it doesn't matter. So I deleted my last video because I felt that I told people indirectly that emotions didn't matter, and that's not a good thing to say because they do matter. I view them as a moral compass. So, for instance, if you're ever faced with like an ethical scenario, such as with abortions and issues like that, um, the morality of that comes into play of that is, oh, I may be helping another child by aborting this one, and I can use their organs for other babies that are around the same size. Well, the morality check of that comes into play with your emotions. So your emotions do play a heavy part also, not just in how you personally feel about things, but in how we come with the concepts of morality, because not everybody wants to take a life. But, that's one big political issue that comes about. And there's, obviously two sides of it. And that's people's personal opinions, and that's things that we obviously have to discuss in politics of, because if you're the mother of a child and your child is going to die because they don't have working lungs, and there's another mother off in another state who does not wish to have a kid but is pregnant, um, you could say that it's ethical for her to carry her child full term, abort, and then use the lungs. That's something that is being discussed throughout. I think it's more so just in California. I don't mean to direct that towards anybody, because I have actually filled out a lot of job applications in California and would very much so go. I'm I have a personal, like, my kind of personal opinion on everything is that I think that everybody's beliefs are valid, whether or not they can be scientifically proven or whatever the case is, because there's obviously a reason why they feel that way. And so, whenever you talk to someone and actually, ask them, well, why do you think that? Well, why do you feel that? And if they can justify, because there's something that they think of that justifies what they're portraying to you. And so, one of the things that I think that is a problem that comes to play with emotions, and where people where people misuse them, and that's more so what I was talking about in my last episode, is in a lot of ways that people misuse their emotions is that it cuts us off from being able to try to understand each other. And if you're not going to try to understand each other, that's where conflicts are going to come about. Now, obviously, there are scenarios where you're like, oh, okay, well, you've explained it to me. I think you're completely wrong. And I don't think we need to do that at all. That happens all the time. And, uh, but we've probably gone like the past 100 years without another world war breaking out. So I would say that we do that maybe a little better than what we used to, because now wars are more so for profit and other monetary gains. Whereas I think you could safely say, through studying history, that wars back then were a little more so of, we're going to come and take your stuff and change your culture because we don't agree with you. And where now it's more so, but it doesn't really matter what you think now. We're just trying to make money, and so we're gonna go to war in all kinds of countries and take oil and various things that they do now, which that's a whole nother story. But I said about the emotions, though, kind of plays into something that I had today, because somebody made me feel kind of emotional, which is a rare thing to do because I really don't care about much. But what I do care about is somebody saying that you don't have to explain things or you don't have to simplify things. And I completely disagree with that because not everybody has the same not everybody has the same mental capacity. So basically, like, what good does it do me to have a conversation with somebody who knows everything that I know, knows it exactly the same way that I knows it, and explains it the same way that I would explain it. So if I'm talking to you about an idea that I have and you have the same idea and you can, and we're using the same words that we both understand, what do I gain from that conversation? That now becomes the most useless conversation ever because I'm not learning anything, you're not learning anything. We both already know what we're talking about. So other than just, I mean, that's no different than me talking about a soap opera that I saw on TV. Like it's that, I mean, it's that useless of a conversation. It's just for fun. There's nothing to gain academically. There's nothing to gain from knowledge wise. Not to say that fun is useless, but in the context of if you're actually trying to get to the solution of something or form new ideas or new thoughts, like that conversation it doesn't exist. And in the case that it happened to me today is I'm in an academic setting, so this is how this is portrayed. And so I'm given like a piece and I'm in a group and they're like, oh, well, um, we want you to read together and, make sure that you understand what the author was talking about. And it's like death and the afterlife is what the subject matter is about. And it was given to me, it was said, so say that you have a doomsday scenario. And this is the philosophy part of my podcast. So if you have a doomsday scenario, so say like I knew that I was going to live out my life, and say I have a bookstore that I run, and I go and I teach underprivileged kids and expose them to things that they normally don't have access to, and trying to trying to help people learn, and things like that. And I have my family name on it, and I create a legacy through it. And my whole thing is like, oh, when I die, I'm gonna give it to my kid, and it's gonna run the family name, and we're gonna help the area, and this will be the legacy of my whole family. Well, then you find out that when you die, 30 days later, the earth is going to disintegrate. It's going to be gone. Like it's not even going to break up into pieces. Like this is going to be little dust particles about yay big. Earth is gone. There's no survivors. So we were reading the text, and it uses a lot of words like non-consequentialist, non-experientialists, and what was another, conservative, which most people probably know what that means, given the current state of politics in the United States. And then there was another one, welfarism and non-welfarism. And those are basically like just outside things influence your experience in life. And for me, no, so I'm a non-welfarist. So for instance, like if somebody got mad at me, I'm still gonna laugh and have fun. It doesn't matter to me. Like, oh, I don't know, why are you upset? Like, okay, like I don't really care. So like if you want to have a conversation with me, we can have a conversation. But if you're gonna get upset, like it doesn't affect me. I'm not gonna get upset because you're upset. Like I'm not gonna ruin my mood because you chose to ruin yours. So we do have those choices. Not to say that there's not justifiable reasons to ever be mad, which because there are, but for me, it's like one of those things of like, what's worth being mad about? And so that's something I always ask myself. So 9 times out of 10, it's not worth being mad about. Because if I'm not going to be able to change the other person's opinion, like the conversation should end anyways. And those are just practices of mine. But what really got me today was reading this passage, and it's using these words, and so there was this guy, and he was talking to another guy in this group, and there was a girl who didn't understand really a certain passage where the author was given a counterpoint um, to a doomsday scenario where he was saying, well, you can have checks of good in the doomsday scenario. And some of those checks of good were saying that, well, there would be no more genocide, no more torture, no more oppression, no more misery, no more pain. Surely these things all go in the plus column. And they do. They do go in the plus column. But it goes back to the scenario that I gave with the abortion, is like, just because it offers some good solutions doesn't mean that the morality of it is going to match with those things, because you see it with characters like Final Fantasy VII, like with Sephiroth. You see it Marvel, and I don't watch Marvel stuff, but I think Marvel Endgame did it with what's his name? Thor's the lightning god. Who's the purple guy with the big chin? Thanos. So yeah. So like, those are the types of people who the author says is a rare person who will go down the path of thought to get to the fact that they're thinking of, well, there's no more suffering and stuff, and so I'm cleansing, I'm saving people from having to suffer in the future, and that's their justifiable reason for destroying the planet. But what he was saying was, because before that, he talks about the emotional aspect of it. So if you ask a person and you're like, hey, world's going to end 30 days after you die, is that a good thing or a bad thing? And most people are going to say, well, it's a bad thing. Because what about my family? What about my son, my kids, my business that I worked so hard to make a legacy for, so that I could, give it to my kids so that they could have something. Because if you're a person who believes in God, maybe you could start maybe you could justify it a little better through God, and you'd be like, well, I mean, even if it does end, everybody would go to heaven or whatever the case is. But if you're a person who doesn't believe in God, they've, established, like through literature of like the Epic of Gilgamesh, where those material things of how they become immortal, if you don't believe in God, how you become immortal is through your legacy. So, if you spent your life making like I said, making a bookstore where you hand out books to underprivileged kids, and that was supposed to be your family's legacy, and these things get taken away, these are the things that the stereotypical human being would think about. And when I say stereotypical, I mean the normal human being. Because all humans think alike due to conformity, and all humans naturally want to conform. That is an anomaly that you see, not just in humans, but in almost all animal groups in the animal kingdom. Yeah, so we're not the only ones, and technically we're in the animal kingdom too. So, so basically I told this girl, I was like, okay, so what he's trying to explain is he's trying to say that the average person, when they're faced with this scenario, are going to say, this is terrible, this is bad, this shouldn't happen, don't let the world in, because their emotions of grief, grief, sadness, and other forms of distress kick in. And so when those kick in, that's the first thing you think about. You're like, oh my gosh, all these bad things, this cannot take place. And because of that emotional thinking on that, you now cannot think further into it. Your emotions have blocked your ability to see that that there would be no more genocide, no more torture, no more oppression, no more misery, and all of these things that we would say are good. Having no more misery is a good thing. Because that's the one thing people talk about. They're always like, well, I wish I could take your pain away. Well, if there was no humans, there would be no pain. But you don't. But most people don't go into that path of thought because of the emotional reactions they had. And I explained to the girl that through the literature that I said of I didn't say specific characters, but I told her, I was like, think of a book or a movie you've seen where they have the villain who says, oh my gosh, the world is so bad, I'm going to destroy it. I'm going to save everybody and destroy it. And then you have all the other characters that are like, no, that's a terrible idea, because they're not thinking the same way that he does. And that's what it's saying, or that's what the author of this is trying to say, is that most people don't go down that line of thought, because most people don't have the capability to look at it, because when they look at it, it's like, even if they did try to look at it, it would scare them and turn them away from it. And so then the guy told me, he was like, well, I can read this passage and not need you to give me metaphors and analogies. He said, you spend too much time giving metaphors and analogies. And I said to him, my reply to that was, well, what good does it do me to repeat to you what this author has said on the same level that he has said it? If you understand it, and I repeat to you using the same words he has, well, I mean, what good does this conversation is? First of all, the goal was to explain this. So if I'm trying to break it down and explain it in notes to turn in, I'm not going to use the same verbiage that the author is using. I'm going to dumb it down so that more people can understand it, because not everybody's on the same intellectual planes as everybody else. Because I'm not going to expect a 12-year-old kid to be able to read something and know it as good as me, or know it as good as anybody else. Like that. That's absolutely absurd. You start with nothing, and you have to get to the point that you want to be at. And so, one of my things is like, I'm always going to explain something to somebody. Like if I read it and I understand it, I'm going to put it in terms that I feel other people would understand it, that it would draw more attention to. And I think that the mentality of, oh, I know I have knowledge, so I'm going to share my knowledge with other knowledgeable people, is completely, it just doesn't make any sense to me. If I have knowledge, I'm going to simplify the work. I'm going to simplify the knowledge that I have to other people so that they can understand the level of thinking that I'm at. So, if I explain to them, through a movie, for instance, like if I were to use Thanos, I'm like, think of it this way. And then now when they go read this text again, now all of these words have meaning to them. Now they're not just big words and they're like, well, I don't really understand how this plays in here, or like, I don't understand how to take this word's definition into this context. Well, now you do, because now you know the scenario that they're trying to talk about, or the idea that they're trying to talk about, because words have to have meaning to them. Just because you know the definition of the word doesn't always mean that you understand what you're reading. There's a path of thought to the words. It's more than just, oh, let me make sure I know the definition of each word, because obviously every word has multiple definitions. So the guy said that to me, and we kind of got into it. And when he was saying all that, and like I made a comment to him, I was like, well, 10 minutes ago, you tell me that I over explain everything and all of this. And when he was having a conversation with another guy, and the girl had asked me a question, and then he kind of like bit back at me on that. And I said, well, she just asked me a question. And I said, and I used one of my dumb analogies then to explain it to her. I was like, so, I mean, what do you want from me? I'm not going to sit here. Like, Cole, you know what non-welfarism is. You know what welfarism is. You know what non-consequentialism is. And you're sitting here repeating these words for someone for her to put down on notes, for us explaining the idea. You didn't explain anything. You repeated the same words that he said, assuming that everybody's going to understand you now. But that wasn't the goal of the assignment. The goal of the assignment was to explain the text. So repeating the same big words isn't explaining the text, was my point. And so, yeah, I kind of got heated in the conversation because I take that very offensively, because you know, I don't like. I brought up the Bible and the Quran and other religious texts. You'll notice that every great philosopher that they talk about, or every great prophet, why are they great prophets? They're great prophets because they explain things into terms that the average human can understand. Okay, not everybody sits down and reads all day long. There's some people who just don't want to read. Okay, and that's perfectly fine if they feel they have other productive things to do. I mean, if you feel like going out to the gym is better than reading, go out to the gym instead of reading. If that's what you like to do, it's what you like to do. It doesn't matter. Me, I like to read. So I read. But still, though, even if you choose not to read, and say you choose to be a logger or a farmer, or work at a factory, or whatever you choose to do in your life, it's up to you. As long as you enjoy it, that's all that matters. We all have our roles that we have to play in society so that society works. Just at the top, I think for people, the thing where we come into a lot of issues in society is that people don't pay respect to other people's positions. They think that their positions matter more. I'm going to be honest. This is my full personal belief. I mean, if you're the president of the United States and you don't give a crap about a factory worker or a small business or whatever, and you're just like, well, it doesn't matter. I only care about who pays me. Okay, that's all fine and dandy, sure. But what happens when all of those people are just like, oh, okay, you're a dick, and I'm just going to go home and start a garden in my backyard and buy a couple of cows or something? And everybody just starts doing that. And then now it's just like you're a president of the rich people. And then now the rich people don't have any workers. See the problem there? But that's why they do a lot of stuff through media and everything to kind of try to rile up sides and emotions. You always notice that they always, whenever you see things on media, they always try to get you to emotionally think, because that's how they can manipulate you. If you logically think about the things that they're saying, you won't be manipulated by them. And then you'll start to think to yourself, wait a second, Fox News is saying this, CNN is saying this, they both contradict each other, but they're both supposed to be giving me true news. And then you go look at an outside news source where it's like not a big media outlet one like they are, like I think Newsmax, and they're getting kind of bigger now. Last I checked, and like I think ABC News isn't that bad, but I mean those are still some big ones though. But and even most people I don't think know a lot of local news. It's like if you have like a Fox 5 or something, like I know Nashville does or something like that. Like that's still owned by Fox News. So whatever you see on Fox News, whoever's like saying what can and can't go on Fox News are the same people that saying what can and can't go on those local news broadcasts as well. And there's actually a video where they have like a bunch of local news channels all saying the same thing, and they do that where they're all saying like, oh, well, we're really concerned about misinformation, blah, blah, blah. And it's like the same scripted line because they read off a teleprompter. And if I'm the head of Fox and my top shareholder is, BlackRock, like, because that is who it is, or it's either BlackRock, State Street, or Vanguard, and they're the top shareholders of Disney. They're the top shareholders, and these people who do military war efforts, by the way, they're the top shareholder of Disney, the top shareholder of Fox News, top shareholder of CNN. So that means that, like, if all of these companies are not doing what they want them to do, and BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, like, they all have board meetings together, because they are in, like, cohorts together when they invest in things. And so if they don't like what Disney's doing, like if Disney makes a movie that they don't like, I'm like, well, I'm just going to pull my money out. And then Disney will be like, oh, no, we'll change the movie. What plot do you want? We'll make people think what you want them to think. And then they betray that in their movie. So that's something that, like, everybody really should be aware of. I mean, you can call it a conspiracy theory all you want, but that is the reality to capitalism. And that is one of its downfalls, especially when the government is lobbied heavily, and it is. I encourage people to look up the nonprofit tax laws, because you'll come to find out that they're pretty scary, actually, because basically you can start a nonprofit organization. So, like, I could go start a nonprofit organization with just myself. Say I get socks for kids or something. I could go to a big corporation like McDonald's and be like, hey, I'm doing this thing, nonprofit, socks for kids. Under the table, they could say to you, hey, I'll give you $100,000 a year, but me giving you $100,000 a year for your nonprofit through donations, I'm going to give you $100,000 a year for your nonprofit so that I can get a tax break, a huge tax break, much more than what I'm giving you. Like, the $100,000 compared to the big tax break that they get is incomparable. And so I give the money to you. And when the time comes for elections, you're going to give $50,000 to this person's campaign. And you're like, oh, okay, I'll do that. So, you get $100,000, and then you go support the person's campaign. Go, even if you don't agree with them. And, that's okay. And people don't think about the actions because they're just like, oh, cool, I get money, because in a nonprofit, like, you pay yourself through that. So, like, if I'm delivering these socks and everything, I can pay myself up to 35% of what I make. So they roughly say like 70 to 75% of nonprofit earns should go to the mission, and then about 30, so that leaves you about, anywhere between 20, 35%, depending on how much you do, to where you can pay yourself. So if you're doing it by yourself, and you in a year raised $500,000, you could give yourself $350,000 of that. So I mean, and these are things that most people don't know. Like, you have to read the literature of it and the codes, and the tax codes and everything. Don't ask me why I read tax codes for fun, but I do. And I'm just like reading this stuff, and I'm just like, wow, like, people say like this is conspiracy theory, but I'm sitting here reading this. I'm like, this is really actually plausible to do. And people do it because I'm sitting here watching them do it, because I'm like, oh, you could do that. But that's the thing, though, is that when they put everybody in emotional thinking, like I gave with the doomsday context, that most people won't go down that path of thought because the emotions block the logical thinking. And so because the media keeps everybody in their emotions, not many people are able to push that aside and basically, like, see the light in essence. So it's like everybody's moving around in darkness, and the light's right there, but they don't even know it's there because actually, yeah, this was almost sound crazy here for a moment, but I had a vision one time when I had some deep ailments going on. I was puking up blood, and I had this vision, and I guess now it makes sense. And so, like, it was like there was like a little circle of light. So it was like that, and then like I could see the light here, and it's like shining into the circle, and I'm looking the session. I'm seeing like people dancing or whatever, and then people talking and just going about their lives, and they don't see that the light is right there. And so like they're all like busy into their, like I said, they're busy into their emotions and talking to each other and like of what is directly in front of them, that they don't see that there's something better literally in a arm's reach from them, because they're so focused on the current situation that they're in. And one of the there was another thing also that I found absolutely magnificent in this theory, and I closed my book. Well, I don't know if you'd call it a theory. It's technically true, and this is also kind of how people become prescient. I think that's right. I think that's how you say it. And basically, what that means is like, so like a lot of people will go to witches or whatever you want to call them, and they're like, "Oh, they predicted my future." No, they didn't predict your future. Sorry to spoil that one for everybody, but if someone's telling you like, "Oh, I can predict your future through palm," maybe they can. I haven't tried palm reading, um, but like if somebody's just like flat out telling you that you came in and they had a conversation with you, and then they're like, okay, well, let's do a tarot card reading, and they watch your reaction and everything. Like if I set down a certain card and I tell you what the meaning of it is, and then I see your reaction, I can see if it affects you or not. If you give me emotional reaction, I can see now if it affects you. If I can see now that it affects you, I can now start to predict your life, because how I said this guy was saying that that most people, when the grief portion hits of the doomsday scenario, they don't go into this other logical reasoning. Most human beings do that. So through stereotypes, I can predict what you're going to do. That also gets into a touchy subject of manipulation, though, as well. But if your intents are pure, you would not think would be manipulating someone. So there's also that in well. You don't want to hear my dating advice compared to that. Trust me, it's a wild one, and I get accused of a lot of things on manipulating people constantly, but I don't date a lot of people, so I disagree with that notion heavily. Because if I didn't want to be with you, I would not waste my time. But you do have to play. You do have to play with someone's. If you do kind of have to you have to make your partner feel. If you can't make your partner feel, well, then they're not really going to stick around, because that's one of the things about relationships, is that you want to feel good in the relationship. And I said I wasn't going to go down this hole, but now I am. But so like I said, you have to come up with things that you can do that will make your partner feel something. And you have to know what it is that makes your partner feel certain ways. So you have to know how your partner will emotionally react to that. You have to know what interests them. And because otherwise that's where you get people and they just say, well, the feeling's just not there anymore, or whatever it is, because that's normally when people first get together, they always have that new feeling. Everybody has that. And so a lot of times is when the new feeling dies down and you don't actually know the person and how their emotions are, and what strings their emotions, well, then, they're going to end up with it. But there was one other piece that I thought was crazy that I'm going to end on. Part of the poignancy of contemplating our own deaths under ordinary rather than doomsday conditions is the recognition that we will no longer be able to respond to these reasons. We will not ourselves be able to help preserve or sustain the things that matter to us. And so that means is like the poignancy is like what matters. So basically, it's the thought process of saying, my legacy isn't going to live on, my family's going to be hurt in the doomsday scenario, or in any scenario where the conflict, it's where you're like thinking about the emotional aspects of things. And when it came to the end of this piece, it said, and in addition to the generic conservatism about value just noted, something more specific is involved in our reaction to the prospective destruction of the particular people we love and treasure. As a feature of the scenario that I've described, that all of our loved ones who survive 30 days beyond our own death will themselves die suddenly, violently, and prematurely. And this prospect itself is sufficient to fill us with horror and dread. In other words, it would fill us with horror and dread even if it were only our own loved ones would be destroyed, and everything and everyone else would survive. Indeed, this dimension of our reaction is liable to be so powerful that it might make it difficult to notice some of the others. For this reason, I want to postpone a discussion of it for a few minutes. And anyways, he goes into something else. And the reason why I said that that's significant is because I have this kind of personal philosophy and theory that a lot of people falter on things because they haven't been there emotionally. So my theory is a physical abuser in a relationship does so because he does so because he doesn't know how to control his emotions. We always say that, but what does that mean? Like, no one ever like sits down and like actually like delves into what does that mean when I say like, oh, he can't control his emotions? Because that's what I was talking about last episode that I deleted because I felt like I was telling people, oh, you don't use your emotions, like that they lead you to things, and like that's kind of sociopathic, and I didn't want to come off as that. So I have to rectify it on this podcast and delete the last one. But so basically, like my theory is, it's like a lot of people will like look at something. So like they'll look at art of, I think the first thing that comes to mind is like The Witcher, for instance. It's in the books, but it's also in the video games. Obviously, the video games depict the scene out, virtually, and it's a scene where the crones of the Crookback Bog are stirring a pot of something, but it has heads and limbs in the pot, and they're naked, and they have blood all over them, and one of them's drinking her blood that's on her lips or something like that. I mean, it's a pretty brutal and gruesome scene. And most people look at that and they're like, oh, that's satanic. I can't look at that. Okay, that's all fine and dandy. But my theory is that's the reason why you can't control your emotions. Because if you can't, so basically what I'm saying is like you have to go over those thoughts in your head. And you have, like, if you see something that it portrays, so when looking at that, now I have in my head decapitated bodies, I have people drinking blood. These are not normal things. I've been taught that in a religious setting, that this is evil. That's what religion would teach about that. And they're like, don't even look at that, run away from that. And I kind of disagree with that, because that's how you fall into things, because you're in unfamiliar territory, so you don't know how to control it. And so if I am looking at it and I'm like, oh wow, that's pretty gruesome and brutal, and then now I'm thinking like, okay, well, they had to chop that person's head off, like they're sitting in there, and I'm thinking about these things and I'm processing it. And now I understand how I would feel about that emotionally. So I've been there and I've done that, and it's like I've seen it, I can portray it, I understand the emotion that goes in behind it. And that's how authors write stories. Well, it's in the and actually it was said this today in a philosophy class that I had, was it was a question that I had posed of, in the theory of God giving us free will. I said, how does that compare to literature? I said, because if I create a character in my head and say my book gets famous, like many authors have, and they have these, and they're up on stage and they're talking about their characters, and they're like, well, she did this and she was very strong and she grew, and she would never do this. And then you ask them, well, like, do you agree with your character? And they're like, no. And I'm like, well, wait a second, that doesn't make any sense, because you're like, aren't you your character? And no, you're not, because that's how we look at it from a philosophical standpoint. So technically your characters have free will, because you've basically like broken off a piece of your brain that has now become its own, and that's the character that you're thinking of. And that's also kind of how the concept of God works, that I don't think that people understand. God is not a physical being, and the churches teach that it is, and that is wrong, is 100% wrong. And I'm not saying that Jesus Christ wasn't God in human form, because I think that he was, but because he uses a lot of terms like I am, and what people don't understand is when he says I am, that's the same as him like using the word I, and not in the sense of what the words mean by definition, but in the sense of, if you look at the throne angels, is literally a wheel there's like a ring, and then another ring, and then it's just like a bunch of rings into this like circle pattern, and there's eyes all around it. And so what it's saying is when he says I am the way, or like I am the light, or I am, like he's a lot of, if you go read not more, it's not really it's mainly just in John and Matthew, I think, where he has a lot of the I am statements. And basically what he's saying is so a human being only knows what they see. So when it says, the image of God, I only know what I see. Okay. So everything in my world is based upon what I can see with my eye. That's how I visualize things. That's how I visualize concepts. But your brain can do the same thing. You can think in your head, okay, I'm visualizing a step ladder so that I can change light bulbs easier. And then now I build that, and now I see it with my eyes. Now step ladder, that's what that is. Okay, that's the image of God. And that's why angels have a bunch of eyes, because we are what we know, we are what we see, and we have the ability to take what we see in our head and conceptualize it into reality. And so when he's saying I am, it is also a reference to your eyes and why angels have multiple eyes, because it's saying that it's basically like portraying the all-seeing eye of like, I have all of this knowledge because I have so many eyes. I can see everything. I can see to the different paths that every human takes. And so therefore, I'm all knowing. I'm omniscient because I can see everything. So that means I can visualize everything. If every idea, every thought path, I know beforehand before you do it. And that's how people become prescient, because they learn how to do, because they understand that, and now they start to think, okay, let me think not what I believe, let me think what other people might believe. And that's kind of the references between that. And so with that being said, if my theory is that if I'm a person who doesn't have the ability to look, or to if I don't have the ability to think about being in a domestic abusing situation because it scares me or whatever the case is, I will not be able to process those emotions. So basically, I'm saying it's better to have the emotions and process the emotions in your own safe scenario, rather than coming to face with that scenario, and now the emotions hitting you for the first time ever, and you have no idea how to control them. And that's how you have crimes of passion and stuff. So I personally think that you are less likely to be in the position of a crime of passion, where lawyers will say like, oh, well, he wants to take this plea deal because he wasn't in his right mind, because emotions flood you with drugs. Most people don't know that. But when we make drugs like heroin and stuff, we're studying the body, like oxycodone, for instance. Like, we study what the body naturally does, and then we recreate those in pills to heighten it. And other forms of stuff, and then other drugs have other effects. But one of the drugs that we make, that's one of the things of it. And it's like, oh well, let's heighten what the body already does. One of the things with recreational purpose drugs. So that being said, is like, it's better to process the emotions in a safe environment. So you should be able to read a book where somebody got their head cut off, and you should take that emotional reaction. You should really think about it. Like, how do you feel about that? Like, what if you were that person? What if all of these things happen to you, and now you're in that situation where you're face to face with somebody that just completely ran your life into a wreck, or did certain things or whatever. And this isn't a one size fits all thing. Obviously, there's multiple routes, and there may be something that happens in somebody's personal life that might not coincide with the theory that I'm giving. But this is obviously one of the scenarios. So, for instance, if I don't know how to react when somebody says something that really makes me mad, and I've never thought about somebody saying those things to me, I'm more likely to punch them in the face. But if I've thought about it beforehand, and I've thought about all of the things that could be said to me, now it's not as big of a deal when it's said to me, because I've already processed those emotions. I've already dealt with it. I've already conquered it. I've already faced my demons, so to speak, on it. So I'll leave people to think about that. And if you enjoy, please like, please share. I don't really have any goals with this other than just sharing knowledge and, I don't know, being a philosopher or something. So, feel free to like, share, and just whatever you feel like doing with that, and appreciate anybody who watches. And feel free to comment, tell me if I'm wrong on something, or if you have a different path of thought, or whatever the case is. I love talking about everything. There's no wrong answers on anything until you start putting it in practice. So in theory, theories don't hurt anybody, except for their emotions maybe. But that's how you learn to process things so that you're not affected in the future. Have a good day.